The U.S. has been pounding Iran overnight. What's the situation? What is President Trump's goal? Can he achieve it? Also, besides President Trump's Department of War, Treasury Secretary Besson's economic war is no less intense than the Department of War's bombing. What has Besson done, and what will be the effect? Welcome to Good Morning America with Feng Wei. Hello to our YouTube viewers and our listeners on Sound of Hope Silicon Valley FM 96.1. Now let's get straight to the point. First, let's talk about President Trump. Yesterday, he stated that since peace talks seem to have stalled, the U.S. will strike Iran on Wednesday and Thursday. Yesterday, President Trump said that tonight the U.S. military will strike Iran's Navy, Air Force, radar, air defense systems, and other forms of defense, along with most of their offensive capabilities. They will all vanish. The U.S. military launched a second round of airstrikes against Iran yesterday at 5:15 p.m. Eastern Time. It was nighttime in Iran then. These airstrikes spanned multiple cities. In the first round, 49 Tomahawk cruise missiles were fired at Iran. Explosions were heard in western Tehran, Iran's capital, and in southern Iran near the Strait of Hormuz, in places like Sirik and Minab. U.S. Secretary of War Hegseth said on Wednesday that the U.S. military used the ceasefire to significantly enhance intelligence gathering and targeting capabilities against Iran. Hegseth said Central Command used the ceasefire wisely and efficiently to refine intelligence and targeting. He noted that compared to the early stages of Operation Epic Fury, the U.S. military's ability to identify targets, gather intelligence, and penetrate networks has been greatly enhanced. This means that the precision and impact of this strike, its ability to hit where it hurts, is much more accurate than the strikes at the beginning of the war. President Trump also revealed that the U.S. plans to seize Karg Island, a vital military and oil production hub for the Iranian regime. President Trump's exact words were, "In the near future, we will take over Karg Island and other oil infrastructure sites and take full control of their oil and gas markets, just as we did with Venezuela, which was very successful for both Venezuela and the United States." Now, Karg Island is extremely significant. This is Iran's island in the Persian Gulf. It's a loading terminal where over 90% of Iran's oil exports are loaded onto tankers. This news has drawn a lot of attention, with many comments emerging. They say that seizing this island means Iran's oil will have no way out. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard would lose its funding, threatening the regime's very survival. Some commentators noted that, most strikingly, Trump said almost the exact same thing in a 1988 interview with The Guardian. So he's been thinking about taking Karg Island for 38 years. Perhaps he'll soon realize that old ambition. Well, I can't help but comment on this. I personally think Trump might just be talking, just to scare the other side. If they really wanted to take it, they'd just do it without saying anything. The fact that they're talking about it now means they don't actually intend to take it. Well, that's just my take. I just couldn't help but comment on it. We'll see as time goes on whether what Feng Wei said is right or not. All right, let's look at Iran's reaction. Iran is now striking Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan in response. It's that classic scenario where A hits Iran and Iran hits B. The Kuwaiti military has intercepted 24 incoming Iranian drones over the past 48 hours. Kuwait reported limited damage and no casualties. In Bahrain, they said that on the morning of the 11th, yesterday morning, 36 Iranian drones attacked Bahrain. Most were intercepted, but an 11-year-old girl was injured in a blast, and some buildings and vehicles were damaged. And the Jordanian military also intercepted and shot down 20 ballistic missiles launched from Iran on the 11th. The report, citing Jordan's national television, stated that the interception operation did not cause any damage or casualties. Now, after the first round of United States airstrikes, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps claimed, "We are now announcing the closure of the Strait of Hormuz." Iran's Supreme Joint Military Command also stated that tankers and merchant ships are no longer allowed to pass through the strait, and they threatened to open fire on any vessel attempting to pass. Of course, this is just empty bluster from the Iranian regime, because whether they can actually close it depends on their ability to enforce it. But their blockade capabilities, especially shore-based radar, have been systematically destroyed by the United States military over the past 2 weeks. United States Central Command immediately clarified that merchant ships are still continuously entering and leaving the Strait of Hormuz tonight. Okay, why is that? 2 reasons. Here's my news summary for everyone. First, after Iran's radar was taken out, they have no idea when any passing vessels are coming through. Second, the United States military is still providing escorts. So actually, a few days ago, well, not a few days ago, the day before yesterday, the United States Apache attack helicopter that was shot down was reportedly one of the aircraft performing escort duties. So in other words, the Freedom Project, or the Freedom of Navigation Plan, which seemed to have been canceled, is actually still happening. It's just happening quietly, not out in the open. Well, the Islamic side also said, Tehran said, that there was a standoff at sea between Iranian and United States forces, and that Iran hit a United States warship in the Strait of Hormuz. United States Central Command clarified that there was no such standoff, it didn't happen, and no United States warships were hit. So, since the two sides' stories don't match up, I think everyone knows whose word is trustworthy and whose isn't. And President Trump also revealed yesterday that the United States military recently carried out a secret mission in the Strait of Hormuz. Last month, despite the ongoing hostilities with Iran, they still escorted over 200 vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. This is what I was talking about, this covert Project Freedom or Freedom Project. In recent days, the United States has secretly escorted 22 tankers through the Strait of Hormuz without Iran's knowledge, according to President Trump. He said this action allowed over 100 million barrels of oil to safely enter the global market. President Trump said, "Last month, I directed our great military to carry out this secret mission to support tankers and other commercial ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz. These operations were conducted at night without lights and outside of Iran's detection range." And then Trump also said that this global energy choke point is now under the control of the United States rather than Iran. He added that this operation demonstrated America's control over this strategic tunnel. President Trump said, "Today is the first time I'm announcing this." He said this yesterday, but we've been transporting millions of barrels of oil, shipping them out every single night. So I'm telling you now because Iran has already found out. For me, it was hard to keep this quiet. I really wanted to say it, but I didn't want to mess things up. Now I can say it. Okay, President Trump said millions of barrels of oil are being shipped out every day, which is why oil prices are $85 to $90 a barrel instead of $250. Of course, what is the oil price now? It should be over 90, right? So that's the situation. Let's talk about the overall oil price, the global oil price. I won't say global. Global oil price, let me give you the global oil price right now. Because with the fighting going on, global oil prices will be, very volatile. Everything will be very tense. So what's the oil price now? Let me see what the price is. Brent crude is, wait, what's going on here? Wait a second. Brent crude, an ad popped up. How annoying. It's $93. Fortunately, it's not too high. So President Trump is indeed trying everything to stabilize oil. Now let's look at the U.S. on Wednesday. On Wednesday, the U.S. released data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics of the Department of Labor. The Consumer Price Index for May rose 0.5% after seasonal adjustment. The annual inflation rate is 4.2%. This is the first time in 3 years that the inflation rate has exceeded 4%. So this increase is basically a slight rise, and this increase is in line with economists' expectations. Okay, for the whole month of May, U.S. energy prices rose 4%. So what does that mean, huh? It's actually talking about the month-over-month change, May compared to April, due to the effects of the Iran war. Energy prices have risen 24% over the past year, which is somewhat similar to what we're feeling. That's not entirely accurate. What we feel is gasoline, which I'll talk about later. But the Bureau of Labor Statistics data says the energy index accounted for over 60% of the overall price increase in May. In other words, the rise in U.S. inflation is mainly on the energy side. Of course, we can all understand that. U.S. gasoline prices rose 7% in May, a 7% monthly increase, which is month over month, and year over year, it's 41% higher than a year ago. So where I live now, the gas price is $4.50, when it should normally be $2.40. So this is the result of the war. Electricity prices are also rising, up 6% from a year ago. 6% is fine, but other things are much different. Natural gas is up 3%, which is a completely different story from 41%. So it's mainly gasoline prices. Or for American consumers and for the entire country, the rise in energy prices is a major source of inflation. This is certainly where Trump is feeling the pressure. Okay, another thing. Central Command continues to maintain the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. So far, 135 ships have been turned back, and 9 ships have been damaged, preventing them from sailing. This week alone, 3 ships were disabled. Their engines, or what they call the engine rooms, were hit. On the last ship that was hit, the explosion in the engine room likely killed people. 3 Indian employees, Indian crew members, were killed. Just this week, 3 Iranian ships tried to what they call run the blockade. They tried to force their way through and were ultimately disabled by the US military. You can see how desperate Iran is. However, the US blockade isn't total. Since it began on April 13th, Central Command says 42 ships carrying humanitarian aid have been allowed through. In other words, for those 42 ships, if you're not involved with energy, business, or arms, the US military will still let you pass. So 42 such ships were allowed to enter Iranian ports. Okay, so the question now is, with the US striking Iran, the US pummeling Iran, that's the general situation. What is President Trump's goal? Can it be achieved? Can it? That was the news. Now for my commentary. Yesterday, I mentioned 3 strategies for Trump: best, middle, and worst. The best strategy is for the US and Israel to show full force, bring back the prince, and simultaneously arm the Iranian people to completely change the regime. That's the best strategy. Once you change it, you'd have an Iran that's like Venezuela, but even more compliant, and it would restore freedom to the Iranian people. The middle strategy is for Israel to strike while the US doesn't, letting Israel play the bad cop and Trump the good cop, because Trump wants to sign a deal and exit, right? But Iran refuses and keeps playing both sides with Trump. So the US should play both sides for real. Since Israel isn't afraid to fight or take responsibility, let them do it. The US can just play the good cop. If you don't want Israel to strike, then sign. If you don't sign, Israel strikes immediately. That's the middle strategy. The worst strategy is for the US to do everything itself. That's what's happening now. The US is doing it alone, hoping to beat Iran into signing a peace treaty. But can they? What do you think? With this kind of approach, will they sign? To be honest, personally, I don't think so. Why? Because those in Iran who kept saying they'd sign were the so-called negotiators, right? The hardliners don't want to sign. You might ask, are there really hardliners and negotiators in Iran? No, there aren't. They're all in it together behind the scenes, just showing 2 different faces. They've been playing President Trump all along, deceiving and delaying. They have no intention of signing. So, can you really beat them into signing? I don't think it's possible either. Also, just now, President Trump on Fox's morning show, Fox and Friends, during their live morning talk show, President Trump said he's unwilling to target Iran's bridges, power plants, and other infrastructure, because such strikes would hurt civilians. He said the Iranian people are suffering under the regime's oppression. President Trump said, I'd rather not do that, because if I did, the people would suffer, they'd be terrified, they don't have guns, but the other side does, and if they tried to gather, they'd be shot. So you can really see President Trump's sense of compassion here. So regarding how this Iran war will end, it's definitely going to be a process. We'll just have to wait and see how things play out for a while, to see how it develops. Now, let's talk about Besant. Besant actually launched his own initiative called Operation Fury, specifically Economic Operation Fury, or the Economic Fury Action. So now, Besant is leading Operation Economic Fury against Iran and its allies. There are 2 main moves. First, the Iranian regime always wants to reclaim their $240 billion in overseas assets. But Besant says Iran will lose everything. Why? Because any damage they cause to America's Gulf allies, meaning if A hits Iran and Iran hits B, like the US hits Iran and Iran hits Gulf nations, any damage caused will be paid for by withdrawing funds directly from Iran's accounts. So for Gulf countries, and since Iran set up a so-called Strait Authority in the Gulf, charging fees to passing ships, they demand protection money or they won't let you through. Any of this protection money Iran collects, the US Treasury will just withdraw that same amount from Iran's overseas accounts. So Besant says any attack Iran launches will only worsen their economic and financial consequences. If you keep this up, eventually your overseas assets will hit zero and just disappear. So it's all directly linked to your actions. It's like using their own spear against their shield, letting a boomerang hit them back. What was it called? Like Merong Fu from Demigods and Semi-Govils, using their own techniques against them, right? Second, on Wednesday, the Treasury issued new sanctions against 9 individuals and entities. And what do? They share 2 traits. First, they all support the Iranian military's arms procurement. Specifically, they procure things like man-portable air defense systems for the Revolutionary Guard. That's the official term. In plain English, it's shoulder-fired missiles meant to shoot down American F-15E fighter jets. So one is, they all support Iranian military procurement. The second trait is they're all Chinese and Hong Kong companies, okay? All 9 of them. So the targets are very, very clear. So Besant said in a statement that the Treasury has frozen the Iranian regime's assets, severely damaging its economy and dismantling Iran's war machine. The Treasury will not tolerate any actions that support the Iranian military. Through Operation Economic Fury, the Treasury is dismantling foreign procurement networks that support the Iranian military. So, of course, he's being polite, but shouldn't foreign be called the CCP procurement network? So, everyone remembers when Trump visited Beijing and asked Xi Jinping face to face, and Xi gave him a promise. Now we see, was that promise a lie? If Xi promised Trump he wouldn't support the Iranian regime militarily, then would there be a need to sanction these 9, these Chinese and Hong Kong companies? Well, of course, for us in our audience, this isn't surprising at all. It would only be surprising if Xi Jinping didn't do it. Also, yesterday, the U.S. military launched a heavy precision airstrike on Payam International Airport in an Iranian city called Karaj. Now, what kind of airport is this? It's a key hub for Iran's illegal military supply chain, used directly to receive secret weapon components unloaded from CCP and Russian cargo ships. And they're transferred via covert flights. Basically, this airport that receives CCP military supplies was hit hard, so the target was very, very clear. All right, next I'll tell you about Trump's new plan to save the SAVE Act at all costs. Before that, a reminder for new viewers, if it's your first time watching, please subscribe to Fang Wei Time and hit the bell so you don't miss the latest news and analysis I bring you every morning. My goal is for you to truly understand America and how it works by watching Feng Wei Time. This next topic is related to that. So, President Trump and the SAVE Act, which aims to reform the U.S. election system at the federal level, it requires states to check voter ID, verify citizenship, and eliminate mail-in ballots, among other things. All of this targets the current loose state of American elections. But so far, the SAVE Act hasn't moved an inch in the Senate. Yesterday, President Trump made another bold move to push it through. What's his trick this time? We know Congress can pass a Reconciliation Act every year. It's called the Reconciliation Act. The goal is to get federal finances in order. Because of this special purpose, it only needs a simple majority in the Senate to pass. So reconciliation is the only narrow path for the majority to pass major agendas each year when they can't overcome a filibuster. Last year, President Trump used reconciliation to pass the Merida Act, right? And this year, the Republican Congress just used it, this happened just a day or two ago, to pass $70 billion in border control funding for a 3-year period to prevent this U.S. border management funding from facing any obstacles over the next 3 years. So what happened? Well, last night, Trump introduced a $350 billion special defense budget reconciliation bill. So here's another one. Didn't you say there's only one per year? Why is there another? Actually, one per year refers to, how should I put it? There are actually 3 per year. One for spending, one for revenue, and one for debt. So a reconciliation bill can target these 3 different areas of U.S. spending. Each has its own version. That's the idea. Now, of course, didn't that $70 billion for the border already cover spending? How can there be another one? Well, yes, this is where it gets very detailed. Because you see, this border funding bill is a vertical sector, right? The US has 13 departments, and the border is just one part of Homeland Security, so it's like 1/13th, meaning it's not used up. This spending reconciliation bill isn't fully utilized. So here's another for the military, adding $350 billion more. So this is another vertical sector, meaning he can justify it by saying, I still haven't exceeded the spending reconciliation limit. That's the point. And why is there this $350 billion in spending? It's because President Trump vowed to raise US defense spending from $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion. So this is one of the steps in that increase, starting with $350 billion. So for this reason, this is surely something the entire Republican Party wants, right? To make America stronger, and actually, Democrats won't oppose it too much either. So Trump's idea is, since both parties want this, fine, let's do another one, and we'll tuck the Save America Act in there, bundle it together, and get it passed. But can this actually pass? Well, there are two hurdles that must be cleared, because last week, President Trump tried the same thing, bundling the Save America Act into the border funding reconciliation bill. The result? In the Senate, the Republicans themselves lost 4 votes, so they couldn't reach 50. It means they didn't even have their own simple majority. They didn't get there, so how could it pass? So it wasn't successful, so it just didn't work. Now they're trying it all over again. So those 4 lost votes must become only 3. That means Susan Collins of Maine, she absolutely has to change her mind. She must support this. Will she support it? That's the first question. The second one's even bigger, which is that the US Senate, the Senate, has someone called a rules advisor. In English, the parliamentarian. He is what you'd call a professional rules consultant. Because the Senate has all these different rules, if every elected senator had to go back and forth arguing over what every rule means, nothing would ever get done. So they created this specific position, the parliamentarian, who is a professional. People just ask him, hey, is this according to the rules? If he says yes, it's yes. If no, it's no. That's how it works. A third-party figure to break the deadlock. And this parliamentarian will almost certainly disagree with what President Trump is doing because he views the Save America Act as an election reform bill. It has nothing to do with the United States federal government's fiscal spending. He'll enforce the Senate's Byrd Rule. The Byrd Rule basically means one thing. Reconciliation bills can only be about money. Nothing else can be stuffed in. That's the Byrd Rule. So based on this, he won't let the Save America Act be stuffed into the reconciliation bill. So what to do, right? What to do? Trump's solution is to tell Senate Leader John Thune to fire the parliamentarian and bring in a more obedient one. So there are 2 hurdles. First, will Susan Collins support it? Will she support tying it in? Second, is Thune willing to fire the parliamentarian? I think there's almost no possibility, no hope. But as you see, President Trump is President Trump. He's still going to push it. You can see how much importance he attaches to the Save America Act or election reform to eliminate corruption. Especially after the chaotic California primary that just ended, President Trump is willing to do whatever it takes to push the Save America Act through, seizing every opportunity. So this is definitely something worth watching. Let's see if it can work.